Shalom, everybody. This is Brian Newman from Shalom to Your Heart, the TV station. Here is CTN, Chattanooga, Cleveland, Athens, and I'm here with Pastor Jonathan Brown from Nehemiah Restoration Fellowship here in Cleveland, Tennessee. It's 1826 Dalton Pike, Southeast, in the Jerusalem Makers Building, and they meet 3 p.m. every Saturday if you guys ever want to come by, and the website is nrfcommunity.org. And we're talking about Hanukkah, which just passed, but it was a good time. So you guys got 12 months to prepare for next year. So Jonathan and I both been keeping Hanukkah for quite a while now. We are believers in Jesus, Yeshua, but we celebrate Hanukkah every December, and he's been doing it a lot longer than I have. So tell us, what is Hanukkah?
All right. Well, in brief, the word Hanukkah is a Hebrew word. It means dedication. We find it in some places in the scriptures, in the Hebrew Bible, what is most commonly called the Old Testament. We don't see a reference to the Feast of Hanukkah or the Festival of Lights, the Festival of Dedication, because it didn't happen yet. So it occurs, its origin is really around what we call the intertestamental period. So the end of the Old Testament, but before the start of the New Testament. It was at a time when the empire of Alexander the Great had fallen apart, and his generals rose up and each took a piece of his kingdom. And the Seleucids, really the Greeks, came in to Judea, and they defiled the temple. And so the time of Hanukkah was when there was sort of a regathering of sort of a Jewish military that retook the temple. And so they rededicated it after it had been broken down, after it had been defiled. They rededicated it over an 8-day period. And so this word for dedication that we find is what they did within the temple. The biblical precedent for Hanukkah that we see is from John chapter 10. So we see it in the Gospels. In most Bibles, it's translated in such a way that it'll say that Jesus was present in Solomon's porch, and it was the festival of dedication. Right? But again, in English, that festival of dedication, well, it's actually Hanukkah.
Yeah. So it's actually in there. We just don't see it because we're so far removed from how people spoke and thought, and or even from just Jewish vocabulary or Hebrew vocabulary. And being sort of removed from the Jewish vocabulary, the Hebrew terminology, and also kind of the difficulty there when it crossed languages. Hanukkah is a Hebrew word, but the Gospel of John was written in Greek. So we end up with it in English, and then we read it in English, exactly, yeah. So is the Feast of Dedication, which is Hanukkah, it's also called the Festival of Lights. Was there any other names, or that's the main two?
It's primarily those two, yeah. Originally, again, we're talking kind of 2nd century BC was when this event with the Greeks happened. And so originally it was known as the Festival of Dedication. They turned it into a festival to commemorate each year the retaking and the repurifying of the temple. At some point later after that, we don't know the exact date, but it started to be known as the Festival of Lights. It started to be known as that relatively early, at least by the 1st century, because the Jewish Roman historian Josephus calls it the Festival of Lights. So at least around the time that the Gospels were being written, it was already known at least by both names.
And Josephus was around 70 AD when he was after he survived that and wrote the histories. Yeah. Josephus
was a Jewish man that was kind of adopted into the Roman military. Just after the fall of the temple in 70.
Because I was thinking it's kind of like Jewish 4th of July, or maybe all believers 4th of July, because that's when they declared independence from tyranny. I mean, and Antiochus, the Greek guy who came in, he was like sacrificing pigs in the altar and throwing women and children off the walls of the city, and terrible stuff. And there was a priest that kind of put a stop to it, and him and his sons, and they all kind of started a militia, basically?
Yeah, there was a priest of the line of Aaron he was named Matthias, right? Or in most English Bibles, again, we would see that name as Matthew.
Yeah.
But there was a priest known as Matthias. And yes, he and his sons were kind of like, we've had enough.
Yeah.
We're not gonna tolerate this. And so that's when they rose up, they retook the temple and fought back, and actually surprisingly well. And it even surprised the Greek army, because here you had this sort of remnant of the greatest empire in history, right? Alexander's remnant. And this small little Jewish revolt is somehow fighting back and actually retaking and reclaiming their own land.
From the entire empire. This is the most powerful empire in the world. It's like the colonial era. We had, the Patriots are fighting the Minutemen, where the, rifles are fighting the entire British Army, which is the most powerful army in the world at the time. And it's almost like a movie like The Patriot or Braveheart, William Wallace against the entire English army, because there's just to get a picture of how outnumbered they are, how outmanned they were, how much more technology and resources the Greeks had than the Jewish people had. So it's a miracle in itself they survived. Then you get to the miracle of the oil later on. And so the oil thing, how did that come about with the oil and the hash browns and the jelly donuts and all the rest that's assorted with it?
Yeah. So later on, again, this all happened during the intertestamental period, about 2nd century BC. Later on, there was record of a sort of a miraculous story. And we don't really know when this legend, if this is dated all the way back to when it did happen.
Yeah.
We don't have a record of this story until a few hundred years later in a collection of Jewish writings of the rabbis known as the Talmud. But it tells of a story that's known as the miracle of the oil, which says that when the Maccabees is the name of this group of the sons of Matthias the priest, right? They're often called the Maccabees. It was actually a nickname for one of his sons, Judah.
Does that mean the hammer?
Maccabee is Hebrew for hammer, yeah. So they kind of a nickname, Judah the Hammer, right? Almost like a battle name.
Yeah.
And so we have
A great wrestler.
Yeah. Well, he won.
Yeah.
And there's that. And so we have this story that came about a few hundred years later, where when the Maccabees came in, when they went to go clean out the temple, one of the things they had to do was they had to relight the menorah. The menorah is the 7 branched candelabra.
And this is a 9.
This is the 9 branch,
Okay.
yeah. I assume we'll get to that in a moment.
Okay.
So they had to relight the menorah, right? Which theirs was far bigger. I
Yeah.
mean, it's huge. And it also didn't use candles,
Yeah.
right? Because dating back to the tabernacle, back to the temple hundreds and hundreds of years before this, it used oil. So it was essentially a 7-branched oil lamp.
With olive oil.
Olive oil, yeah, pure olive oil. And so they had to trim the wicks and they had to refill the oil. Well, when they finally got through clearing everything out of the temple and purifying it and going through this process, they found at the beginning of this 8 days that they only had enough oil for 1 day.
Yeah.
And so they filled the lamps and they lit them because it's supposed to burn. All 7 branches are supposed to burn at all times. So they lit them, and they expected the oil to run out.
Yeah.
And so again, this rabbinic story
So like
from a
1
few
day
hundred
of
years
supply.
later was that the 1 day's worth of oil actually lasted all 8 days. So that's known as the miracle of the oil. Where that plays into some traditional elements is, especially in terms of food, we have a lot of fried foods. Right? You've probably heard of latkes, kind of like fried hash brown pancakes, sort of thing. We do sufganiyot, which are jelly donuts. But anything fried, specifically deep fried, which here in the South,
it's the Southern Kingdom.
It is. It's perfect for here in the South.
Yeah, it's the southern tribe of Israel.
But the idea being that you fry the foods because the oil.
Miracle of the oil.
Right. So again, it's as with a lot of things within Judaism, you find that the physical symbol is sort of anchoring you to something deeper, to something older.
Yeah. So it's just like a physical reminder. But when you're teaching children something, it's musical and it's hands-on. And that's how children learn. If you want them to retain your culture and your identity and everything, or root them in faith, you start them young, like playing dreidels, for example. And the dreidel is it's a little game piece with 4 sides and a Hebrew letter on each. And you have chocolate money, which is how I prefer to get paid. So how does the dreidel work? You spin it?
Yeah, it's essentially like a spinning top. So you can think of it kind of a block with a rounded bottom. And you spin it. And each of the 4 sides has a different Hebrew letter. And each Hebrew letter is part of the game.
Yeah.
So one letter, and you pay into a gold coin, like you mentioned. Normally when children play, they have little chocolate coins.
Yeah.
And so you pay in. Everybody pays in. You spin your turn. And either you take nothing, or you land on one that says you have to pay another, or you take half the pot, or you take the whole thing. And you keep going round after round until eventually somebody takes the whole thing.
It's like Monopoly mixed with poker. I mean, you go until somebody's just out of chocolate.
Usually.
That's good. And it's 8 days inside just one, so it's not like Christmas. You wake up and open gifts, and 20 minutes later it's over. I mean, it's an 8-day thing. So what do you do with kids is it everybody gets a present 8 days, like your boss, your second cousin, or is it just like mostly children or close family members with the gift giving?
It can greatly vary. The most common traditional thing is children will get a gift every night. Usually that's something small.
Yeah.
What we've done in years prior, because I have 5 children.
Yeah.
What we've done in years prior is we would kind of build up. So the first few nights is they would all work together opening something for everyone. So a new board game or something that we can all, enjoy together as a family. And then the later, kind of we build up to it towards the end, then each of the kids would get their own specific thing there.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that some people do as a tradition, and it greatly depends. The expectation is really that this is a family thing.
Yeah.
Right, that you are keeping up with it, and that you're lighting the Hanukkah, right, this 9-branched menorah every night, and so you're wanting to do something every night to commemorate this 8-day count.
Yeah. So it's like a big grandparents come over, cousins. It's a big thing, and it's 8 days. So it's not as materialistic as maybe Christmas might seem, because it's small gifts. You have 8 small gifts. Like you might go to Five Below, the Dollar Tree, or something, and get 8 small things, but there's not just this 20-minute extravaganza, whoever got the biggest thing. So it's more of a focus. It's focused on faith and family, but there is a little bit of gift giving for children.
Yeah, yeah, and without a doubt, I mean, just like anything, it can become commercialized as well.
Yeah.
But there is a lot more focus, especially all week long, week and a day, I guess. But there is a lot more focus on the interactions with families, on the learning, on the sort of the tradition of it itself, not just as, I'm going to count down until I get more stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a lot more family time. Yeah, there's a lot of things.
Yeah.
There's obviously some things now that have come up within the last few years or in the last 20 years or so that weren't prior traditions. Right? I mean, the ugly Hanukkah sweater kind of came from an ugly Christmas sweater thing.
Yeah.
To I guess sort of make it more relatable to the modern person. But a lot of these traditions are very, very old. Even the dreidel itself, the idea of spinning this top, it was at the time, again, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, a way of learning Scripture.
When it was outlawed, because they outlawed reading the Torah, they outlawed reading the Bible. So you had the rumor is, the story is when they just hide the Bible and get the dreidel out, so the kids act like they're playing games and the guards come by or the police, whoever come by.
That was the idea, was, if a Greek or later Roman soldier comes in and looks at you, he's going to see you spinning a little top.
Yeah.
And playing a game.
Yeah.
He's not going to see you studying the Bible that has at the time been banned.
Been outlawed.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the Protestant Reformation. It ties into so many historical movements we can learn, but that's like, I guess, the Jewish version or the ultra-biblical version is the Reformation, the colonial era. There's always the resistance movements in history. But this is really tied to God doing a miracle to save them. It wasn't man that saved them. It was like, no, God came through and did this because they're outnumbered 20-1, I think. And then the miracle of the oil, like we don't know if that's true or not, but it's a faith-building exercise.
Yeah.
And there's a good book. It's Robin Sampson wrote. It's purple, and it's a family guide to celebrating the biblical feast. It's a big, thick purple book. It's got these kids' activities in it for all the feasts and celebrations. And what do you guys do? I know you told me a little bit about what you do with 5 children for Hanukkah.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a number of different things. I mean, one thing is we always decorate. We would normally have
blue and white.
Blue and white is most common. Most traditional. We have these banners that we put out. We have columns in front of our house.
Yeah.
On the porch, and so we have a banner that we'll hang from a couple of them, and another thing that we'll hang on the door that just says Happy Hanukkah. So we've got some of those things. We've got little Hanukkah decorations. One of the biggest things that is kind of central to it is, as I mentioned, is every night is lighting the Hanukkah.
Yeah.
Of course, there are 9 branches because there are 8 days. And the middle one is what's used to light the others. That's
the shamash, the servant?
Yeah.
Shamash.
Yeah, shamash is Hebrew for servant. There's also one of those on the 7-branch, like the temple menorah. But traditionally, you'd light the middle one, and then you use the middle one to light the others. And you would go from one side, so you'd light this one. The next night, you'd light this one and this one. The next light, this one, this one, this one, and so on, all the way progressing across.
And you start in the middle, so it's like the light of the world, and you just keep, and that lights all the other lights.
And there was actually a debate that kind of touches on in around the 1st century, about contemporary with the time of Yeshua, between kind of the 2 top Jewish rabbis at the time, was Hillel and Shammai, over do you light an additional one every night, or do you start with all of them and take one away every night? And so one of them said that essentially you would start with the whole thing, and you would slowly take them away. Each night you'd light fewer.
Yeah.
But Hillel won the debate by saying that light should always be increasing. Light should be causing more light. You should not be decreasing.
Because in Judaism, the entire focus is light and life. That's kind of the paradigm of viewing the world. Like, if in the ancient days, if a funeral procession and a wedding procession collide on a narrow road, the wedding procession has the right of way, because that's life. Life is the focus.
Yeah. And light should be contagious, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea, that it has an impact, and light brings into more light.
And it has no shadow.
So for us,
Yeah.
like I said, that's kind of the starting point, is lighting the Hanukkah each night. Usually, on most nights at least, we would play a few rounds of dreidel.
Yeah.
What we normally do is we start with like a whole box of the little chocolate coins.
Yeah.
And each of the kids would get theirs.
Is it Geld or Gelb? I know in
Geld.
German, I think it's Geld. It's Geld in Yiddish.
Geld. Is usually what it's called. So they'd start with 7 or 8 coins. I usually do 8 just because 8 nights,
Yeah.
But
I like
each person that's playing will start with 8, and then, like I said, everybody you pay one in, you spin. It tells you, do you take one, do you take half, or do you pay one, do you take half, do you do nothing, right? So you go round and round and round, and then at the end, one person wins. And so usually for the kids, for the sort of game aspect, is if you win, then you get to eat 4 of them.
Oh.
But everybody gets.
So you get hyper children.
Exactly.
For 8 nights in a row.
Exactly. But no, so they get to, they get the prize of winning, right? But then everybody gets to eat some, and that way we have enough. You don't just eat the whole container in the first night.
Yeah.
So it kind of lasts the whole week. So that's a big.
It's a miracle of the chocolate.
Yeah, it is. It lasts all 8 nights.
With 5 kids now, you got the miracle of chocolate.
Yeah. But we also have some other things that we do. There's, I mean, we talk about the story, which I don't think we've mentioned yet. Actually, where do you find the story of Hanukkah? Because if you open your Bible, as most people will have, 66 books in it, you won't find the story of what happened, what I described with the Greek coming in and all that.
Yeah, you just see like John 10, all of a sudden it's like a mention, but it's
not. Yeah, it's like, and Jesus was in the temple, and it was the festival of dedication, and he was in Solomon's porch.
And like, where is that Leviticus 23 with Rosh Hashanah and Purim and everything? I mean, not Purim, Passover.
Passover and Tabernacles and all those. Again, you don't find them there because the events that created the holiday didn't exist yet. Right. It's kind of like nobody celebrated 4th of July before 1776 because the events hadn't taken place yet. But we actually find the largest account of the whole ordeal is found in the book of 1st Maccabees.
Yeah.
It's considered apocryphal. In fact, if you have a Catholic Bible, you actually find it there. That's kind of the irony of it.
Yeah.
Right. It's a distinctly Jewish story that you find only really in a Catholic or Orthodox
and they have
Bible.
Tobit and Judith and a couple other books. They're
Tobit
very
and
Jewish
Judith.
books in there too, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. All of these books, all of these, again, we call them apocrypha.
Yeah.
Which kind of
the hidden books.
Hidden, yeah. And these were all books that if you had one of the original King James that were printed in 1611, you had these books in there.
Oh, they're in the King James?
They were in the original 1611.
So they came
King
out
James.
later in the other Protestant books.
They were removed. In some instances, they were removed because of printing cost.
Yeah.
Right. If you added these extra, depends on which ones, usually 12 to 14 different books.
Yeah.
It makes the Bible a lot bigger. Right? It adds a lot of extra.
And printing was astronomical.
Yeah. So it made it a lot more expensive. And these were books that are, they're called apocryphal. They're also sometimes called deuterocanonical.
Yeah.
Which basically, if you think of the Bible as canon is 66 books, deutero means secondary.
Yeah.
Right? So second canon. So it's kind of a separate
It's Bible light, like a diet Bible. It's
yeah, kind of
supplemental.
Supplemental. Yeah, I like that term. So First Maccabees is one of these. There are 4 books that are known as books of Maccabees. The second one retells a lot of events. It was written a little bit later.
Yeah.
It retells a lot of the same events. Third and fourth actually offer different stories that relate to the same period of time, and that's really why they're still labeled books of Maccabees, is because they still relate to that same period of time when there was so much heavy oppression coming in from. Again, the remnants of the Greek takeover of Judea.
There's a rumor, I haven't really checked into it much, I saw the quote once, where one of the kings of the Spartans, because in the movie 300, the Spartans are fighting off the Persians at the same time the same Spartans were in 300, but there's a different time frame. Excuse me. He writes a letter to the Jews, and the Jews write a letter to him saying, "Hey, we're cousins. Come help us out." I haven't looked into it, but it's like an interesting historical note. But there's 4 Maccabees. I know it's not the first one. The first Maccabees tells like Hanukkah. So there's these later retellings where they just kind of add to it.
Yeah, First Maccabees is largely the telling of, again, Matthias and his sons, and they were priests.
Yeah.
Right, they were priests of the temple, and it's kind of a historical recounting of the events of what led up to them retaking the temple, as well as a little bit of the fallout.
Yeah.
Obviously they took it back, and suddenly Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who was the Seleucid ruler at the time.
Or Epimanes and Antiochus, the crazy man, the appearance of craziness,
Yeah.
lunacy.
But there were other leaders at the time as well.
Yeah.
Right. You have Ptolemy, who was kind of the Greek installed king of Egypt at that time. You had Nicanor is mentioned, being over part of Syria, and so there's different players here.
It got divided up. It wasn't in Revelation. It's the leopard with 3 heads and wings was King Alexander the Great's empire, and Daniel as well. It was Daniel, and it gets divided into three generals, and it takes over the world very quickly.
Well, and actually, the events of First Maccabees aligns almost perfectly with some of the material you find in Daniel, I believe 11 and 12, where it talks about, there's the king of the north, and this ruler comes down, and this one moves, and this happens, and all.
Yeah.
If you read through Maccabees, you can actually almost perfectly map what area this king was from versus his general that came down here. And a lot of things. It's a fascinating study.
It's interesting they were priests because, like, the British called the Revolutionary War the Presbyterian War, because all these pastors, the Black Robe Regiment, pastors wore black robes at the time, and they accused the pastors of starting the whole thing, the whole revolution. Like Matthias, they were Levites, they were temple priests, and they're the ones initiating the war because it's so contrary to our thought. Our concept of clergy is not, guerrilla warfare and things, but this is exactly what they did, and some of the Revolutionary War people did. And so, like Hanukkah, like being Christian, how would someone, I guess, find relevance in that, or for their family? I know there's a rumor going around that if you look at when John the Baptist was born and Jesus was born and everybody was conceived, that possibly that Jesus was conceived on Hanukkah time, during Hanukkah time, and born like on Rosh Hashanah or Sukkot, which are in the fall 9 months later, because there's that 6-month difference between him and John. But I don't know if you heard much about that or looked at that much.
Well, it's like a lot of things. It is a theory.
Yeah.
And there is reason to give credence to the theory. And it is something that if you're just thinking about it, it would make sense.
Yeah, he's the light of the world.
Right, light of the world coming into being on the Festival of Lights.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that does make sense. He makes references in the Gospels to himself being the temple.
Yeah.
Right? Because he makes a reference to tear down this temple.
In 3 days.
He was speaking of the temple of his body.
Yeah.
Right, it says. So things like that. And how Hanukkah is, again, it's about the rededication of the temple, taking it from where it had been misused or abused, and aiming it back directly at.
It's like a great New Year's
focus.
resolution.
Yeah,
His body's a temple, then you could rededicate it to God's service.
Yeah, and so for believers today, first of all, I like to point out that again, it's in the Gospels.
Yeah.
If we had the little bracelet on that said, "What would Jesus do?"
He would do Hanukkah.
Well, Hanukkah, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a fun one. It is a bit difficult to see culturally for people. I mean, especially in modern day America.
Yeah.
About the best you'll see is the one little section at Walmart or Target or something, where they'll have like, oh well, here's aisles and aisles and aisles in Christmas stuff, and here's this one little section of blue and white Hanukkah stuff. But we are seeing a little bit more interest in it. Like I said, for one, I think it's the fact that Jesus did it.
Yeah.
And you see Yeshua there at the temple when there's this huge celebration going on because they did that every year.
And there was another commentary read that like they didn't know what to do with the stones in the temple. The pig was sacrificed. I was like, the Messiah's going to figure it out on Hanukkah. So like every Hanukkah, are you the Messiah? Can you tell us what to do with these stones? Because we can't destroy them and we can't use them either.
You mean the ones that were defiled when the Greeks came in?
Yeah, and they kept them at Solomon's porch.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said, I think, for the relevance of it. In our culture, in America, we have this idea of New Year's resolutions, which you kind of mentioned. And it's a time where people will, we mark the time.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now we are officially transitioning to a different year.
Yeah.
And we mark that time by being reflective, by saying, you know what, this year I'm going to eat better. I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to be, more patient. I'm
eat
going to
this
be
last jelly donut, and then I'm going on a diet.
Exactly. You know what? No, I'll start tomorrow instead.
Yeah, start tomorrow. I'll start after the 9th day. That's when I start the diet.
I mean, and you can look at this, and people obviously have this mind because you can look at statistics of gym memberships.
Yeah.
It goes through
the
the
roof
every
after
January 1st.
And by June, it's back down.
Well, the follow-through is a little lacking. But, again, the mindset, people understand the concept.
Of starting over.
Of starting over, and exactly, of being rededicated to some new endeavor, some new path. And so Hanukkah is a good point in the year to kind of re-examine yourself, and rededicate yourself. We are told in Scripture that our bodies are symbolic of the temple itself, because the whole purpose of the temple was it housed the presence of God.
Yeah.
And we, as believers, house the presence of God in the Holy Spirit. And so if we understand that the temple was rededicated to face it back to where its priority should be, in proper use being worship of the Lord,
Yeah.
then we can do the same thing with ourselves.
And our house and our family.
Exactly.
And the whole thing.
Exactly. It's not something that we should have to do.
Yeah.
Every single year have to rededicate yourself.
But we're human, so we drift off over
exactly.
time.
And we do. And so this is a good time to be reminded, to be brought back to that sort of spiritual truth.
And then Hanukkah was on the 25th day of Kislev, which is 12th month. So it's our last month is December, and the 25th is Christmas. So is the 25th of the Hebrew calendar, which is close is Hanukkah usually.
Well, it's the 9th month.
Oh, it's 9 months. Oh, that's right, because
It's the 25th day of Kislev. Yeah, is the name of the.
Because the Adar is the last month. I'm glad you're here. Jonathan's our Hebrew expert.
But yes, the 25th day of the 9th month is when it starts.
Yeah.
And then it goes into it goes for 8 days. So it goes into the next month.
So anybody has a Hanukkah bush or anything like this? Because the accusation is it gets too Christmassy.
I mean, I have heard I have seen, I should say, and encountered this idea, which is common American response.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we like a lot of different things, and we like to put things together. If you've ever seen somebody make like a pizza lasagna,
Yeah.
or like a cheeseburger lasagna or something, like, hey, we want all the things, and we're just going to throw them all together.
We don't want appropriate everyone's culture at once.
Exactly. It's the American
Dietarily.
way. Modern Americans especially, there is that tendency to do it. And the Hanukkah bush was essentially the same thing. It was, well, I'll set up a small tree, and I'll put blue and white lights on it.
Yeah.
And
so we have something up.
So, yeah, I have seen that before.
Okay. So do you know people that do both?
I do. Yeah, I know a few families from a Messianic synagogue that I attended when I was younger that would observe both. Sometimes they run together.
Yeah,
right? I mean, sometimes
overlap. It was like over Thanksgiving this year. I think.
Yeah, this year Hanukkah started I think it's just 2 days after Thanksgiving. So sometimes it's as early as Thanksgiving, or the end of November, and sometimes it's as late in December that part of it runs into Christmas Day as well. The reason for that is because the Jewish calendar is lunisolar, right? It's largely based on a lunar cycle and reconciled with the solar cycle. So whereas in like our standard Gregorian calendar,
all the sun and
we have leap years.
Yeah.
Right, a leap year where we'll add an extra day every 4 years. In the Hebrew calendar, each month is much shorter, and then every certain number of years, you add a whole extra month.
Oh wow!
So that's why it can shift.
That could be a whole show one day.
Well,
I explain the Hebrew calendar to people. This is Brian Newman from Let's Talk Shalom. We're here 6:30s on Fridays and 2:30s on Sundays on CTN. And please come check us out and visit Nehemiah Restoration Fellowship, nrffellowship.org.